Welcome to prayer meeting. Our devotional tonight comes from Hebrews chapter 2, verses 14 through 18. Hebrews 2, 14 through 18. The title of our thoughts are Help in Time of Temptation. Now please don't anyone throw stones at me, because I'm reading these verses from the Revised Standard Version. Now, there's some people think that the RSV is the devil's Bible because of certain passages and so forth, and then certain groups that use it. But there are many passages where the rendering is extremely good, and that's why I chose it for reading these verses. Verses 14 to 15 says, "Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same nature, that through death he might destroy him who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who, through fear of death, were subject to lifelong bondage." Here is a cardinal fact in the incarnation. In other words, God becoming man in Jesus of Nazareth. The children that it mentions in verse 14 are those that are mentioned up above in verse 11, which is not in our text. But verse 11 says these children are those that are sanctified, those that have been made holy through the grace of God. So since therefore the children, the holy ones, share in flesh and blood, he himself, meaning Christ, likewise partook of the same nature. As holy people, we still have flesh and blood. And by that, it means that we are subject to human passions and we can be tempted. If anyone tries to tell you that Christians are never tempted, holy people are never tempted, sanctified people are never tempted, just turn them off and don't believe them. We still have flesh and blood, and we are still subject to temptation. Now, we do thank God that we have been saved from sin. And we thank God that we know what God declares to be good. And we thank God that we do what God says is good. That yet, as moral beings, we still know what is evil, and we still have the ability to choose evil. As long as we are in the flesh, we will retain the knowledge of good and evil. We have the ability to do good. We have the ability to do evil. And that's where this temptation thing comes in. The devil is the force behind all temptation to do evil. That is, temptation to disobey God. And every Christian has an encounter with this devil and temptation to disobey God from time to time. It's not all the time, but from time to time, temptation does come around. Jesus is our helper in the time of temptation because he actually knows what temptation feels like, and he knows how it works because he was tempted in all points, such as we are tempted. Christ took on the exact same human nature in Jesus of Nazareth. And that human nature had exactly the same human passions as your human nature has. Jesus was no different from you in that sense. The drawing to disobedience in the time of temptation was just as strong to him as it is in you during your time of temptation. And if I can just imagine a little bit, I can imagine that the temptation of Jesus, he felt it even worse than we feel our temptations. Matthew, the 4th chapter, records the temptation of Jesus, which it was not the only time that he was tempted. It just says he got tempted on these 3 points, and the devil left him for a season, which suggests that the devil came back and tried again. So you might think that the temptation to turn stones into bread, that was a simple thing for him just to resist that. Well, I'll tell you what, you go for 40 days without eating. And if somebody comes up and tells you, hey, you can turn this brick into a loaf of bread, you just might try it. Jesus was hungry. He felt the hunger. And furthermore, he knew who he was. And he thought, yeah, I'm the creator. I created these stones. I created wheat. I created all that it takes to make bread. And if I want to, yes, I could make this stone turn into bread. And then so forth on the other things. Those temptations were real to Jesus. We just read over them and they don't affect us. How much did they affect Jesus? I believe they affected him as much as your worst temptation affects you, and maybe even more. You see, God ordained that Jesus' humanity be tested. And in that test, Jesus proved himself faithful in spite of the intensity of the temptations. Why? So that he could show you the way through temptation to victory. Thank God. Now let's look at verse 16. If you're reading from the King James Version, you're going to scratch your head because it's not going to sound anything like what I'm reading here. For surely it is not with angels that he is concerned, but with the descendants of Abraham. Keep in mind the verse above that says he came to deliver those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong bondage. For surely it's not with angels that he's concerned, but with the descendants of Abraham. Now, the King James that you're holding in your hand has, he took not on him the nature of angels, but he took on him the seed of Abraham. Well, that is in fact true. I'm not disputing that. And the Revised Standard Version doesn't dispute it, and the other versions that I like to use don't dispute that. But what the King James has is not a precise rendering in American English. What is really intended by that verse is what the New King James has, the RSV has, and so forth like that, is that Jesus came as a human rather than as an angel or a purely spiritual entity, so that he could personally experience what people experience in temptation. There's a reason for the incarnation. And one of those reasons is so that Jesus could in fact be tempted as the people he created are tempted. Verses 17 and 18. Therefore, and this backs up the thought, he had to be made like his brethren in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make expiation for the sins of the people. For because he himself has suffered and been tempted, He is able to help those who are tempted. Thank God. Therefore, for the reason just stated, Jesus had to be made like mankind in every respect, in all things, so that his mercy in making atonement for our sins would be, in fact, valid and correct. God could not abrogate his moral law that requires a sinner's death for his sin. He just couldn't erase it, couldn't make it go away. Jesus, because of that reason, became our vicarious representative in facing temptation, resisting and overcoming temptation through the same means as God's people must do. Why? So that he could die an innocent death in behalf of the sins of all people of all times. In other words, so that he could make expiation for the sins of the people. He suffered and was tempted so that he could reach out to you and take you by the proverbial hand and take you safely through your temptations. He's been there. He's been in your shoes. There's an old chorus that speaks to this very thing. My Lord knows the way through the wilderness. All I have to do is follow. Are you following Jesus through your times of temptation? Or are you just giving in because you feel it is impossible not to give in? There are a lot of people calling themselves Christians who just feel it's impossible impossible to not give in. Is that correct English? They feel like they have to give in. Okay? Say that in a positive way. Okay? But Jesus is there. And he says, follow me. I've been in your shoes. I've been through this battle. I know what you feel. And I know the thoughts that run through your mind. Because I experienced the same thing. I was tempted in all points like you are tempted, yet without sin. Why? Because he was the Son of God? No, because he submitted to God in that temptation. When you are tempted, God calls upon you to submit to his way. Submit to the truth that you know. Submit to the strength of the Holy Spirit. That's how Jesus did. He submitted to the strength of the Holy Spirit. Stayed with the Spirit of God during that time of temptation. And the devil got tired. Oh, well, I'll come back. So when you are tempted, does the devil get tired of waiting for you? Well, okay, I can't do anything right now. I'll be back. Or you get tempted and say, well, it's temptation time. Okay, boom, here I go. Some people, that's just the way they do. They just give up without even trying. Well, if that is your case, you are listening to the wrong voice. Follow Jesus. He knows the way because he has been there. Amen. He is our help.